Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Ellsworth Hoffman, and welcome to this week's edition of a brand new show called The Goldie Show. Our host, Goldie, firmly believes that everyday people are worth more than gold. Goldie's guest this afternoon is a woman of many talents, an accomplished artist, architect, and community organizer, Uzma Mirza. Miss Mirza comes to Fort Wayne as a citizen of the world. She has her own architecture firm, along with being a calligraphist and a writer. Her art is displayed across America and Canada. Now let's join Goldie and her guest, Uzma Mirza.
Hi, welcome to Goldie Show. I have Uzma Mirza here, and I have a couple questions to ask her. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Not bad. I'm here just to ask you a couple questions, and I hope, you'll answer to the best of your knowledge. And first of all, let's start your journey, where you are, where you came from, and what inspired you to come here.
Well, I guess the first thing would be, I get that question asked a lot. Where am I from? I usually say planet Earth.
Well, that's understandable. It's nice.
So I think I think I'm not alone in this when I say we all emerge or hail from different places, and different places have influenced the making of what we are.
That's true.
So, just long story short, my journey actually started, my parents are originally from Pakistan. Well, India heritage, originally grandparents India, but Pakistan. And I have a birthright of Pakistan, but I've never lived there. My parents left via Libya. So my memory is a little bit of Libya, and till I was about 4, and they went to Canada. So my mom and dad, they went to Canada, and that's where, where am I from? I would say Canada, with my birthright.
When you came to Indiana, what was your educational background? Did you study in Canada and then come here, or you furthered your studies from Canada to here?
Actually, I grew up in Canada my entire life until I finished architecture school. And so I went into Carleton University in Ottawa. It's a 5-year degree program. I did architecture there, and I did 2 years before that. And I finished all my studies, and then my professional life was in the United States when I joined my parents here. And so the NCARB licensing, working for firms, all happened in the United States. So I would say my youth growing up, Canada, which is Nova Scotia and Ottawa, a little bit of Toronto and London, Ontario, and then coming into the United States, Indiana, where I've worked in places like in Indianapolis. I've worked and lived in Connecticut, worked and lived in Chicago, and also in Fort Wayne for a year and a half. And they in different firms, and they have formed the core of my architectural experience to become a professional architect and licensed, etc.
Awesome. What were your challenges along the way, when it comes to your educational background, and your work, what challenges did you really have to face, and what steps did you take to overcome?
Well, there have been many challenges. I grew up in a family where activism, diversity, had a mom who was a producer in a Kaleidoscope Pakistan program in Ottawa, where so her faith was important, as well as the cultural aspect. And so building Islamic schools and helping the community, the women's auxiliary, all this was important. We grew up with all that in Canada. And then into Indiana, it went even further. So that she founded, for example, like the Islamic school here, which is now UEF in Fort Wayne.
Wonderful.
So I recognized myself overcoming obstacles first as a Muslim woman, and an architect, and the other caps that I wear. And it's sort of like when you're in a boat, you have crashes of water coming through, maintaining afloat on that boat, and keep going. You're going to crash, but you don't let yourself crash. You just keep going. You do have obstacles, in Canada we were teased, you're called Paggy, or you're called these. This is not today. Today everything is politically correct. When I was growing up, that didn't exist. Kids can be nasty, so you grew up with that. And I'm sure others relate to what I'm talking about. And when you're a woman of color and a female, you have to overcome not just your things in your own culture, and also some wrong interpretation of religion that are generally male dominated, but you don't let it become a crutch, but you try and go forward.
We were talking about, being a Muslim woman in the Muslim world. And did you have kind of a, like a tug of war with, religion and what you're doing and, and other religions also? What kind of an impact did you have? Or was you felt like you were being pulled apart?
That's a good question. As a Muslim woman, I think you don't realize it at the time that you're different. And I think I realized more that I was different. In Canada, you grow up with some racism and discrimination, but I didn't realize that you are this until I came to the United States. I'm really I'm sorry to say, but the United States, with all the non-racist, we are very open to everyone, is more racist than what I saw in Canada. Probably shouldn't say that.
It's okay, because you know why?
But it made me stronger.
That's right.
I had to overcome certain aspects, and sometimes it makes you defensive, but you overcome it and you keep going. And it obviously forms part of your personality. But in living in a Judeo-Christian world, I grew up with Christians, Jews, non-atheists, all different faiths, Hindus. And as a Muslim woman, I saw everybody as friends. But sometimes the difference you could tell, because I don't eat pork, you don't date like everyone else. You get married in a slightly different way, and men and women interaction is different. And it's all, rooted in our faith under the auspice of a creator, God. But I think I never let it affect my journey, and it always reinforced me. So when I fell, or if I was about to fall, God was always there. And it's hard for people to fathom that. Only people who really can understand in this, in an entity that is invisible, is there, but it's not there.
Mm-hmm. I know.
So who can help you in your journey to realize, once we die, the truth that will be revealed to us. Because this is a world of trials and tribulations.
Definitely.
So I expect tribulations to come, though it's hard. Easier said than done, but I do expect tribulations. And it actually, you're tested, and it's sort of like a GRE test.
Mm-hmm.
The more answers you answer correctly, the harder the test becomes. Same thing in our world, that exam. And if you do bad in these tests, the answers get easier because you can't handle it. So there's a verse in the Quran, in Surah Baqarah, that says near the end that you are only given a burden of how much you can handle, and God doesn't give you anything more than what you can handle. Each of us are different.
Oh, definitely. There's no problem.
So generally, as a Muslim woman, it's been hard, but it hasn't been hard. And I think my faith has carried me. And when it comes to science, for example, and religion in Islam, there's no issue. Never has been. Now, in the Judeo-Christian world, it has been because I don't want to get into religion, but it's the view of God, because generally it's been a trinity, a male, a man, a beard, or a son. Where in Islam, there's this purity of oneness, and that entity is close to me, like right here, right now, and around all of us.
That's true.
And it's closer to me than my own jugular vein, which is a quote from the Quran. And so science is actually a tool to understand the signs of the universe of what is God. Wow. God being an English word, Allah being the Arabic, means one. But I'll call him creator, the divine.
That's true.
Khuda. So these are just tools. Mm-hmm. So Islam, if you look at the entire golden age of the Islamic history, and they never saw it as a problem. Astronomy, theology, the Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun, which Ronald Reagan quoted, also used about taxes, tax laws, economy, economics, medicine. You look like Galen's work. If you go back, you'll see that the Islamic world, when they understood God and the principles in the Enlightenment, which, by the way, Enlightenment of the West was actually influenced by the Islamic world, you'll see how beautiful that it becomes a tool, and it's a tool. It's materials of knowing your spiritual. So you rise from dunya, of the carnal self, into the divine, into basically the spiritual. I should not say divine, I'm not myself, but we have a reflected spiritual part from that creator. And now I'm obviously speaking as a Muslim woman and a Muslim perspective. And generally, so when I looked at Judeo-Christians around me, I actually saw it as the same revelation as Muslims.
Wow, you got so much knowledge of so many things. Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
I never really saw it differently, but that nobody really would want to ask because they saw it as this other religion. But as Muslims, we think it's a continuation. Of the same message. Mm-hmm. And we just don't believe that, that Jesus was deified and all these other things.
The next question I wanted to ask you, I know you are so well educated and all. What were your challenge as a Muslim woman to work in a male-dominated world?
Well, as an architect, it is very male-dominated. Now, when you go to school, now it's almost 50-60% or almost 50-50. But in the practicing world, it's basically women in the field of architecture, which is really, it's an engineering field with a design aspect to it, has gone down exponentially. And there was recently an article in the AIA, which is the American Institute of Architects, that a question by a famous architect, female architect, was, where are all the women? Where is everyone disappearing? And the answer is, from what I've heard so many peers, colleagues, they have children. It is crazy hours. They drive you, enslave you to the bone, and they don't pay you well. And there is a double standard that the guy next to me will be paid more. And I didn't realize all this until later, as I'm a higher up now than when I was out of school. And hence, you see, we're fighting for pay. But the fact is, not all are like that, but a boys' club does exist, but I don't want to use it as a cry.
I hope you're enjoying Goldie's interview with Uzma Mirza. In case you just tuned in, I'm Sarah Ellsworth Hoffman, and you're watching The Goldie Show. The Goldie Show is a half-hour treat with our host, Goldie, interviewing folks from different walks of life who are making a positive difference in our community. You can see The Goldie Show every Thursday afternoon at 1 o'clock. You can connect to The Goldie Show by checking us out on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on our website, goldieshow.com. Now let's go back to Goldie and her interview with Uzma Mirza.
Being a woman of so much caliber, so much of education, were you ever shunned away or pushed away, oh, you're a woman, you can't do this? Or, how did you come across or overcome that bump?
It's like a can of worms. Yes, there were many, and there still are, and there always has been, not just my profession, but all my activism, community work. Now, God's law is Quran, we implement, and the actions of all the prophets, especially the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. However, practice by human beings doesn't exactly coincide with what's written and what's said of being compassionate about trying to, how you treat women, how you treat men, the rights of everyone. Unfortunately, we live in a very hypocritical world.
I agree.
They use religion, use religion to suit their interests. When it's good for them, they'll say the Quran says this. And then on the other side, no, it doesn't really say this, and then they'll let go, and we're really open-minded about all this. And the fact is, that's also not what the Quran says, how you display it. So they use it as a self-interest, even though God is not saying that. Wow. Or God would not, they take it out of context. And then they say, oh, God said this. No, he did not. Look at the context of where it was from. What did it mean? And that happens in a lot of community work. My mom's has worked in that area as well when we were kids. In the sense of, in the Muslim community. And again, it's nothing to do with Islam. It's to do with the mentalities of the people, because everybody's at different levels. And it's about how they see the world that influences based on their culture, and then their reading or who they're reading of the Quran. And many have not even read it, but they're basing it on what this leadership said. That's why you have so many in Muslim countries, these leaderships that are controlling people's minds and people's actions, causing wars. And I mean, that's a totally different topic. I mean, people say the Muslim world is so unenlightened. Well, let's go back. It used to be exactly the opposite. The medieval age, lack of writing, witch trials, the Inquisition by Spain. The Muslims were the enlightened ones at the time. So let's look at this as world history and not as Islam, Muslim, East, West. We're all part of one world history. Different societies fall, and let's give credit to what you have based on someone, for example, writing paper.
Going back to all your education and all, I know you do artwork also, Uzma. Your artwork is totally different from other people's artwork. And what influenced you to actually deviate or separate yourself from the other artwork?
Wow, that's a really heavy question and very convoluted and a linear cyclical process, and to a point where I'm at today. Basically, long story short, as much as I can, as a child, art was always like a Linus's blanket for me. If you know Charlie Brown, Linus he always held this blanket.
Yes.
So it was my blanket. So basically, being influenced from, the medical world, engineering, sciences, geometry, I think as a child, art was the Linus's blanket. As you're doing your work, I was good at it, and friends would make me do all the art, the cards and things in school. And it just grew. And growing up in Nova Scotia in Canada, on an island, on Cape Breton Island, I was around a lot of peers, and my parents, my father's medical community. Many of them were doctors, but they were also artists.
Oh, wow.
But they did a lot of landscape. So at 12 or 13, I did my first landscape. And I took some, it was an oil painting, and I still have them somewhere. So I started with oils, drawing, pastels, charcoal. I've done all the mediums and medias and worked with them. And everything evolved. But what was a core of all my work was knowing who I am, knowing the divine, the spiritual part. Why am I here? I always ask that. I used to play a lot of sports, academics, extracurricular activity. All these were important. That's when my parents focused us in, which is a good thing. I think kids should need to be focused, as opposed to today it's do whatever you want to do. I think then in that case, why do you have parents? But anyway, that's another topic. So my work evolved from a very figurative to, as I hit, I got older, into to a point where, at the same time, in parallel, I was understanding the Quran. As a Muslim woman, my journey, what is the spiritual part? What is God saying to me? I would ask questions, and sometimes the book would just fall, and there was the answer. I can't explain it. It was uncanny. And then living in obviously, primarily, you are a huge minority in Nova Scotia, 5 Pakistani families. So, you would think, how can I even have religion in me or have no God? But I think growing up in the natural world, I grew up, downhill skiing, outdoors, always look at by water, growing up on the Atlantic Ocean. My dad was a nature lover, and also an orthopedic surgeon. So medicine, nature, geometry, the sciences of the world, knowing the universe, it was a core of my life. Not just mine, all of our families, but for me, that was a huge influence. And then having debates and discussions with my dad. So that evolved my art, while my art, it's in parallel, all happening in parallel. Today, it's a focus, never planned. I didn't say, I'm going to be an artist. It was something that was a Linus's blanket.
So it all came natural.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I wasn't trained in art. It was just something God gave me, something given to me by the divine. And it just got harnessed by the questions and things I did. And I did a lot of writing. And so I have a lot of writing, you write from poetry to just writing and coming up with physics principles of the string theory, why you think it's right or it's wrong, or different things like that. Chaos theory.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, being a Muslim woman, being so, well educated, diverse in so many areas, what is your message as a Muslim woman to young, old, middle-aged, teen girls growing up? What is your message to them of what they should do, or what would you think that they can get from you? Or how you can influence them?
I think by the work I do as an architect, as a spiritual artist, and of course the author aspect, the writing is there, but then the philanthropy, that's kind of the charitable work that I do. And I know a lot of people do it, they don't talk about it, and I'm reluctant to talk about it. But I do have, I am a founder of a nonprofit, an organization in the U.S. It is kind of the core of all my architecture being the outer in the world, and the art is actually the inner. It's the play of the two, kind of like a hydrogen ion. If you know, in the different energy levels, the hydrogen has a half spin, it goes from top to bottom. Kind of like that, fluctuating. Outer informs inner, inner informs the outer. You cannot just be the spiritual person without living it and learning from outer. You have to live outer and then also informs inner. And that's the core of my faith as a Muslim woman. I am to know. And you can only realize that if you really delve into not just dhikr, the remembrance of your Creator, and understanding that guidance manual. I mean, I ask people, have you ever read it? I mean, understand what's there? It's such a very clear book, but it's not a scientific book. So it's influenced me, and I encourage other girls to know what they're practicing, what they're being told. Reach a point in your life to empower yourself and not be brainwashed.
So basically, you're trying to tell the young girls out, men and women, boys and girls, don't give up your dream. Follow your dream. Encourage yourself. Listen. Open your eyes.
Empower yourself, but the dream needs to be also, you are bound on this planet. You have the physics, materiality of this planet. Don't listen to the media that you can do anything you want, girls and boys, because you can't. You don't know what the future holds. So drive defensively. Sometimes you do a little offensive, you fall, you go forward, but have something as a core. Have a core. Have something that carries you. And for me, it is God, and I hope it is for others.
I agree with
God
you.
in the sense of a spiritual, that divine, that there's more to this world. This is temporary. And I am going to say that as a Muslim woman, this is temporary. These are trials, like a GRE, and they get harder the closer you get to knowing the truth.
That's true.
And I think today people, because of television, movies, the entire stage industry, we live in I coined the phrase in some of my writings, the stage of illusion.
I call it a mirage.
It's a mirage.
It's a mirage.
It's kind of like the holographic universe.
Yes.
This is real, or the cave of Plato, that the reality is elsewhere. And then, of course, Aristotle was for the world of form. Plato was for up there. I say it's both of them. If for those Greek lovers, Greek mythology lovers, or I'm so sorry, not mythology, Greek scholar lovers, it's Plato and Aristotle both. And in Islam, it believes and God tells us to live both. It's almost like a vertical and a horizontal plane. The vertical is your journey is towards the spiritual, and the horizontal is your living in the world. But the focus is for girls and boys. That core for me has been the divine, and it's not a man. It's not a man with a beard. It's the divine of where we are coming from. And that keeps me going.
That's awesome.
And therefore, so my work, architecture, outer, the art, the inner, and my philanthropy to gift to people, to promote diversity, interfaith, and is so important because it's a core that connects it all. It's like the glue.
Now, from all this that you've done, what are your plans for future, or how you plan to move forward in life with so much richness of knowledge you have?
I'm having a fundraiser coming up on June 21st. So the goal is to have this foundation become bigger. It's a grassroots organization. The work it does right now, I use my art, and it's the only reason I'm allowed to exhibit, is I give a percentage to charity, to the Pen and Ink Pot Foundation that I have. and for its allocations and its work, which is primarily educational scholarships and sustainable building and a few others, and forums like the Taste of Ramadan, to fundraisers, to other conferences and speakers. So I plan to build that a little more, and to a point where, see, in the Muslim world, there's something called, in charity, we're asked to give 2.5% of our income, liquid wealth, after all the debts are done, to the poor. But there's also something else called sadaqah jariyah. So when you leave this universe, there's only 3 things that will matter. One is a pious child who will pray for you, pray for your soul, for wrongs you may have done or things, and he or she, the good things they do go to you. 2 would be a charity, like a school, hospital, that continues on when you're gone. And 3rd would be something you write that benefits humankind. So I failed at the child part. I'm working on the 2 other parts.
Well, that's good. At least you're working on something.
Right. So through my architecture, the green building, the environment is so important. So, green being the tool to produce sustainable buildings. And then, of course, my art to help it raise funds for the charity, as well as giving back to society, towards the building of society. So I consider my nonprofit as a sadaqah jariyah, as well as my art.
It was a pleasure. I learned a lot from you today that I didn't know. I'm being honest with you. I mean, sometimes it's honest to say I didn't know and I know now. And it was great. And hopefully you will succeed from what I got from your, talking to you, inshallah, like you say. And I want the audience to also get a lot of things from you, and I hope they learned a lot from what you have said and explained. And it was an honor to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Khudafis.
That brings us to the close of this week's episode of The Goldie Show. Don't miss next week's episode when Goldie is joined by Stephen Manning, who will share his story of how he overcame mental illness to become a successful business owner. Check out The Goldie Show here every Thursday afternoon at 1 o'clock. The Goldie Show, where we believe that everyday people are worth more than gold. I'm Sarah Ellsworth Hoffman. See you soon.